Great. All right, folks, thanks for being here. Tonight we are going to be talking about subsidence. So what is subsidence? Subsidence is excess groundwater pumping that can compact the soils where the water is stored around an aquifer, and it causes that land around it to sink. Land has sunk as much as 28 feet since the 1920s in parts of the San Joaquin Valley. Dry conditions set the stage for subsidence to worsen as the San Joaquin Valley region relies more heavily on groundwater. Sorry, my notes are a little frozen. All right. I'm sorry, as the region relies more heavily on groundwater than surface water, although we talk all the time about not being too reliant on surface water either, it's a balance. Subsidence is really not a short-lived problem. Once the land compacts, it never finds its old elevation, no matter how many floods there are. So farmers that are overdrafting so much water from prehistoric depths that the earth is actually sinking, along with the roads, bridges, dams, homes, and canals, they're all going with it. So how does this happen? For example, an alfalfa farmer might dig a well at 1,200 feet and then take water from a neighboring grape farmer. So then that grape farmer says, oh, somebody's taking my water. Now I'm going to have to dig a little deeper to 1,600 feet to reach water. But then they're both out drilled by maybe an almond farmer who has a little more money and resources. I'm just going to ask folks to mute themselves again. Thanks. And then maybe this almond farmer can drill a little further to 2,000 feet. There was a cotton farmer, J.G. Boswell, who drilled 52 wells into the bottom of Old Tulare Lake, and 7 of those wells reached 2,500 feet. The more farmers drill, the worse the problem becomes. It's getting to be a big one. And I hope you can see this. This is an example of a visual of subsidence. This bridge has begun to sink and now it's almost touching the surface of the water. Generally, you don't want your bridges to touch water. You know, you want to stay above the water on a bridge, so it's an issue. So Joe Poland is a little hero of mine. He was the world's most expert soil subsidence scientist, known as Mr. Soil Subsidence. He was trained at Harvard and Stanford and renowned in Venice, Italy, for figuring out why Venice was sinking and then how to make it stop. But in his 35 years working for the U.S. Geological Survey, about 5,200 square miles of the Central Valley had sunk at least 1 foot. In other parts of the country, this might really be an alarming, scary thing, but it's not something that raises a ton of alarms here. And one theory is that we live in the land of earthquakes, so the movement of land is not the most intimidating to some people when it doesn't register on the Richter scale. One geologist said, unfortunately, it's not like a giant sinkhole that happens out of nowhere. You have to know where to look. And because it's happening by degrees, some people feel like they can pretend that it's not happening at all, but it's happening slowly and surely. You can see here that on a summer day in 1977, this is a famous photo that Joe took. In the middle of a drought that was setting records at the time, Joe posed next to a utility pole on a vineyard and Pinoche Road in Mendota. That's in the Central Valley. He showed the public examples of subsidence inch by inch for years and assumed that in the face of scientific data, they'd respond, but people weren't really quite responding. So he realized he needed to make a dramatic image. And he took this photo using this pole as kind of a yardstick to say, look, in half a century, the land right there had sunk 30 feet. It's a little scary to realize that that pole, the land under it, and that vineyard all sunk in unison. So let's talk first about the geology of the Central Valley or San Joaquin Valley as a whole. The San Joaquin Valley was carved out 60 million years ago. En route to the Pacific Ocean and a bay connecting it, rivers deposited clay, sand, silt, and gravel. 2 million years ago in the Pleistocene epoch, which is also known as the Great Ice Age, The Sierra Nevada began to lift a little higher, and that raised the alluvial fans, which steepened the rivers and then made the force of the rivers much more erosive. So this erosion led to deposits of sediment shallowing out the bay and drying up the waters, and that really created the valley, San Joaquin Valley. The rivers then lost their direct path to the ocean now that there's this coastal range developing. So instead, the only thing the snowmelt could really do was go down into the clay and the sand and the gravel, and it created a lake thousands of feet below the surface. Sorry, we've got someone else with us. In the mid-1940s, the amount of water stored in the aquifer's upper strata was estimated to be about 100 million acre feet. If you haven't heard us talk about acre feet before, 1 acre foot is about the size of a football field. And that's generally what an average household will use for water in a year, is 1 acre foot. Then around that time, agriculture boomed and really took off. And then with increasingly stronger pumps and deeper wells, the water table sank and it started bringing the earth down with it, but in seemingly random patterns. So the trouble is it'll sink in one spot, but leave a neighboring house alone. After the State Water Project and Central Valley Project became operational, and if you have questions about what those are, we can talk about that later. But generally, it's the infrastructure that gets water from the Delta region to the Central Valley and Southern California. After these projects became operational in the 70s and 80s, some scientists didn't think they had to really worry about subsidence anymore, because with plentiful imported water, maybe it's not an issue, but farmers still continued to pump groundwater. Scientists thought that it wasn't a concern, so they stopped taking measurements of subsidence from 1983 until 2009, and this created a big data gap, so that's an issue. But a few droughts later, they realized that they were wrong, and they started measuring again, and they were shocked to see the great variability in the groundwater depth and the Earth's elevation. In drier periods, the water table dropped hundreds of feet, and then in wet years, it filled up, but never really all the way again. So in a century's time, the cumulative overdraft of that aquifer has been more than 120 million acre feet in the Central Valley, which is the equivalent to draining Lake Tahoe dry. On the west side of the valley, the rainfall, which is 4 to 7 inches a year, it really doesn't stretch far. It's pretty much, actually that's desert standards. Below 7 inches a year makes it a desert technically. The San Joaquin River, as it stretches north to the Delta, it recharges some of the aquifer in flood years and the irrigation canals that move the Delta water south, and it replenishes the groundwater as it leaks from the bottoms. But I'll talk in a minute about how some of that ground is still just not able to be replenished by surface water. Some of the bigger growers grew tired of waiting for drillers, especially in the drought in the last few years with the boom of almonds and everything else. So some of these bigger growers bought their own drilling equipment, and it's not always clear if everyone has the right permits to be using this drilling equipment. And, without permits, it's maybe sometimes hard to monitor exactly how much water some folks are taking. In the middle of Old Tulare Lake, there was no government agency supervising the groundwater pumping of J.G. Boswell, the guy I mentioned earlier. And the main levee protecting Corcoran from the flood dropped a foot in 8 months. Excuse me. No one at Corcoran City Hall at the time wanted to blame him for causing the earth to sink so dramatically or consider what kind of damage the next flood could bring. The Boswells and other growers in Tulare Lake were not using their water for just their own crops, but instead they started selling it to the irrigation districts for tens of millions of dollars to the folks that had depleted their own aquifers. So to shore up the sinking levee and keep Corcoran dry when the lake returns, the residents and the nearby state prison, I don't know if you know this, but that's the one that held Charles Manson over there in Corcoran. The residents in that prison had to pay an extra $10 million in taxes to fix these things. So in a nutshell, growers were depleting the groundwater via pumping and then selling that water to irrigation districts paid for by public funds. And then it was again on the public to pay for the damages caused to the infrastructure by the subsidence from all of this pumping. So it's really kind of becoming a cycle and a mess. Irrigation districts have access to rivers and water from the State Water Project and Central Valley Project, but the white areas, so those are areas crusted with salt, and you can even see it when you drive through the salty flats, those areas really rely on groundwater. So with drip irrigation technology that allows water and chemicals to reach a really precise root zone, farmers are growing further west into the valley, closer to the coastal range than they ever thought possible in these what they consider third-class soils. The alkali soil that was once thought to be just not good enough even for pasturage due to its impenetrable clay layers and ground crusted in salts, that really thick salt. Now they use that to grow nuts because of all of this drip irrigation technology. So we talk a lot about Metropolitan Water District, and I just want to note that, you know, they really do have a little bit of a hand in everything. They really are such a large water district. They're not the biggest player in this by any means, but just to explain how they factor into these dynamics, they're actively searching for solutions to subsidence, and they occasionally fund research because they own several islands in the Delta, and because a good chunk of their water is imported from the Delta region. So they're always interested in what's happening in the Delta. The research they're looking into now is about rice paddies, and will that have any effects on the subsidence in the Delta? I did want to mention that over the next few months, they'll be reviewing their Bay Delta policies, and that'll culminate in May 2022. They're going to be hosting workshops with member agencies. So not really the public, but certainly things we can listen to and comment on. But with their member agencies in Southern California, they're going to be talking about Delta Island opportunities, the voluntary agreements, which we talked about this fall, and sites reservoir planning participation, which we just fought about last month. Their current and future programs and projects are going to focus on native species conservation and preservation partnerships, which sounds like a great idea, but I'm a little skeptical. And they're going to talk about Bay Delta science, Delta conveyance, you know, the big one, the tunnel, and watershed partnerships. So just wanted to highlight that they've always got a hand in everything, and we will be keeping an eye on that. Back to a little more science. So there have been a lot of hotspots moving around and popping up as these salty, crusty layers of alkali land out in Western Valley as they become nut farms and perennial farms. We're seeing hotspots all over the place. So as agriculture expands into new areas, then subsidence ends up traveling with it. NASA charts hotspots with their satellites, and they can get their accuracy down to within a centimeter. It's pretty impressive. Two of the hottest spots are located near, oh, my internet's unstable. I hope you can hear me. I can repeat things later if you need me to. Two of the hottest spots are located near Corcoran, near the bottom of the old Tulare Lake, and the other is outside of Pixley, which is in Tulare County as well. The worst hot spot is in Red Top, another rural area over there. Across a 1,200 square mile swath of the valley, a landmass that could hold 2 Los Angeleses, the earth is sinking nearly a foot per year, and that's rivaling the greatest rate of subsidence ever recorded. So if you can imagine that, a place the size of 2 Los Angeleses is now getting bumpy roads and poles tilting sideways and canals and levees bumping up. It's a pretty large area to be dealing with a problem like this, and clearly it's going to be a very expensive problem too. So let's talk a little bit more about what subsidence does to the land and to folks. So reduced surface water availability, i.e. the dry years, during the droughts of 1976 to 7, 1986 to 92, 2007 to 2009, and 2012 to 2015, they all caused a big spike in groundwater pumping in the San Joaquin Valley, which led to drastic increases in subsidence. One example of the effects of subsidence is the Delta Mendota Canal, which transports Delta water 116 miles south to a slough near Mendota. The canal is technically a series of 20 pools back to back, and then it's divided by small dams. So that kind of provides a system of checks and balances. So operators can fix one area if there's a problem rather than shut down the whole canal. Subsidence is causing parts of the canal to buckle, and then it's sending those canals deeper into the earth, which means a much larger stretch of the canal loses gravity, and it makes the water back up in some areas. So then operators have to lift the dam and the gates to match it so it doesn't spill over, but then that dam doesn't match the road or the bridges next to it or really anything around it, and sometimes that can be a big problem. Sometimes the water even laps over the bridges in some location, and that's, pretty scary to be driving through. Another example is the Sac Dam on the San Joaquin River, which was sinking about 6 inches a year as of 2016. And then that one, they're pushing water uphill at about half of its capacity. To fix that one would cost about $20 million. In the drought of 2012 to 2016, the Friant Kern Canal lost about 40% of its capacity in some of their stretches. Not the whole thing, but in some of their stretches. And the California Aqueduct lost 20% in some of their stretches. A 20-mile stretch in the middle of the California Aqueduct, which is what you can see right here in this diagram, is, and the California Aqueduct, again, if you haven't heard us talk about it, that's the one that delivers water from the Delta down through the Central Valley in Southern California. So this 20-mile stretch is also sinking. Operators set the pumps to a maximum force, but there are still several 10-mile stretches where the water may end up overflowing. There is no system in California that uses as much energy as the California Aqueduct. Let me just say that again. There's nothing in California that uses as much energy as the California Aqueduct. 15% of that monthly energy bill is due to overcoming the effects of subsidence. All this extra pumping results in millions of dollars in energy costs each year, not to mention increasing greenhouse gases and everything else. But to rebuild these dams, canals, and bridges, everything really will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It's estimated that state and federal water agencies have already spent $100 million on repairs to different dams and canals, roads, bridges, everything since the 1960s. So if we zoom in a little more underground, we can see a big part of the problem is clay. So why does one spot sink and another stay put? This is really due to the fine clay that came down the mountain when the land was conceived. Subsidence is most impacted by clay. Across the west side of the valley, clay accumulated in kind of fluctuating depths, and there's no real way to dig and pump water from a well without causing subsidence in this region. Some layers of clay may be less than an inch, some may be 150 foot thick, and then deep into the earth or right at the surface. So this means that one farmer can penetrate a layer of clay at 100 feet deep, while another has to penetrate 1,000 feet before they hit the clay, and then they may not be far from one another. They could be next door neighbors, and this is happening. Where there's clay, there's water. So water may be found in the porous sediments above the clay, below it, or inside a layer of clay. Clay stores more water per unit than any other sediment, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Penetrating a layer of clay may open up a mother lode of water to a farmer, but as soon as the farmer begins to pump water from under the layer of clay or within it, the clay starts to compress. The clay tightens and it shrinks as it loses water, bringing the earth down with it as it fills in the gaps. Thinner layers of clay means the earth sinks faster, but thicker layers of clay mean the earth will sink more over time. For every unit that an aquifer collapses in clay, the ability to store water there is forever lost by that unit. There are thousands of wells in the San Joaquin Valley, and Oro Loma, which is a geographical name for the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, is sinking at about 4 inches a year as of 2016. Scarcity of water is only due in part to climate change and drought, but a lot of it is due to poor planning and overdrafting by municipal and agricultural users. Even in precipitation record-setting years such as 2010 to 11, Central Valley farmers asked for more water and more water. Many farmers that once grew cotton or melons or garlic have switched from those seasonal crops to perennial or permanent ones, which makes it harder to respond to dry times. A farmer with seasonal crops can look at a drought and decide what to grow and what to fallow, but a farmer who grows perennial crops like almonds and pistachios is kind of in a tough spot when water's low. They can either dry out their trees or dig a deeper well. And with the money that a lot of farmers make from nuts because it's a more lucrative crop, a well is a viable option for many of them. So by cranking up irrigation, farmers can yield hundreds of pounds of more nuts in an economy that is currently nuts about nuts, and that can bring in millions of dollars. So as farmers take on more perennial crops, they're really hardening their demand for water while also using more water than ever before. And you can just see here that photo we saw of Joe Poland. You know, the problem continues. It's not going away. The layers of clay that play a role in subsidence also contribute to poor water quality. So as irrigation water drips through the soil, it hits the hard clay layer and then it bubbles back up. And when it bubbles back up, it brings with it the toxic stew of that salt and selenium, pesticides, and then runoff from ag stuff and the roads and really everything, all the yucky stuff on the dirt, it gets in there and it really can't penetrate that clay. So it just kind of sits in that layer above the clay. These pollutants were once siphoned off into holding ponds, and that's where they killed and deformed a lot of migratory birds. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation created the $22 million grassland bypass project, which moves that polluted water onto 6,000 acres of tall wheatgrass. The water is treated once by the wheatgrass, which is a salt-tolerant feed for cattle and dairy cows, and then again to a reverse osmosis plant nearby, and then after that, it's discharged into a river. Some people might call it a huge success, some might call it a taxpayer-funded laundering operation for big ag in areas that maybe shouldn't be farmed. You know, different sides of the coin. Subsidence and SGMA. So the passage of SGMA, which is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014, set forth a statewide framework aimed at helping to protect groundwater resources over the long term. SGMA is comprised from a 3-bill legislative package, including AB 1739, SB 1168, and SB 1319, and some other regulations. If you're interested in really diving into that, I can repeat that again for you later. SGMA requires local agencies to form groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, for the high and medium priority basins. GSAs develop and implement groundwater sustainability plans to avoid undesirable results and mitigate overdraft within 20 years. So under SGMA, there are 6 undesirable results that every groundwater sustainability plan should seek to avoid, and one of these is subsidence. Plans must define how they will track subsidence over time and set standards to avoid significant and unreasonable impacts. Generally, they vary widely in their approaches. Most plans set goals that are not tied to specific past or future impacts. Many of these thresholds are high, which allows for the rates of land subsidence observed during recent droughts. So this raises the risk of future harm basically everywhere within these regions. The SGMA framework allows plans to be more tolerant of continued subsidence in places that will not incur as much infrastructure damage. Pumpers favor this flexibility because avoiding subsidence generally requires cutting back significantly on groundwater use, and this cutback is expensive for them during droughts. Groundwater management plans also need to consider other parties who will be hurt by overdrafting, though, like the communities around them and the environment. In areas where there's already been structural damage, like the Delta Mendota and Canal and Chowchilla, the target might be more about reducing additional damage to levees or conveyance. While SGMA may protect groundwater and produce other benefits eventually, the challenge is that each groundwater sustainability agency, or GSA, has to come up with a groundwater management plan, which has to be approved by the state. Each GSA has about 20 years to come into compliance, which is plenty of time for real damage from subsidence to continue, especially in the era of climate change. The big farmers who often sit on the irrigation district boards are the same people who will create the plans. Farmers have argued that a farmer's past beneficial use of groundwater means they should have a right to the future use of groundwater. So basically, the more land that a farmer plants and the more water they pump to irrigate it before the law goes into effect, the more they'll be allowed to pump into the future. Some plans are giving themselves a lot of wiggle room over the next 20 years, in some cases accepting 10 to 15 feet of additional subsidence. Even the lower thresholds might not end infrastructure problems and risk. For example, the Friant Water Authority has warned that plans in the Tule Basin will further reduce capacity in the Friant Kern Canal, significantly affecting downstream water users. Similarly, the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, found that an additional 2.1 feet of subsidence in some sections of the California aqueduct could further harm downstream water users. This is roughly a third of the maximum amount allowed in the vicinity of the aqueduct by the West Side Basin Plan, which is 6 feet. A volunteer had asked me a little bit about subsidence and gas production, so I just wanted to touch on it briefly. There is another cause of subsidence, which causes the activation of surface faults, which can damage roads and houses and buildings, loss of wetlands, and flooding. That cause is the production of oil or gas, which involves the removal of oil, natural gas, and produced water from deep underground reservoirs. Since the 1980s, research has discovered that subsidence due to oil and gas production is greater than previously thought. Subsidence due to oil and gas production has two types. One type is local and centered on the oil or gas field where the oil, gas, and water is withdrawn. And the second is regional in scope and generally covers several oil or gas fields that are connected underground. But for our purposes, we're really just going to focus on subsidence due to groundwater overdrafting, because that's kind of our focus here. I also wanted to mention that subsidence isn't just a California or San Joaquin Valley issue. Almost 1,600 of the world's major cities have at least a 50-50 chance of experiencing subsidence, and more than half of them are also located in flood-prone areas. Worldwide, areas that add up to about 2.2 million square kilometers, which is about the size of Greenland, a little bigger, have a higher risk of subsidence. Often, those locales are typically concentrated near urban and irrigated areas, and are home to about 1.2 billion people total, where demand for groundwater is really high. And these regions collectively account for 12% of the world's GDP, which is a whopping $8.19 trillion, according to the proceedings of the National Academy of Science. So it's a problem everywhere. It's something that we've got to figure out. So it's not just a California thing. We're not just hating on California farmers, but it is a serious problem locally too. So what's next? What do we do? The groundwater plans are still in their early stages. It's important that the state strengthens the information base for effective management. The lack of public monitoring data raises challenges for local efforts, though. The PPIC, which is the Public Policy Institute of California, and one of the groups that we read a lot of their stuff and take everything they say pretty seriously. Great group to follow. They recommend continued state support for annual valley-wide surveys using satellite data that could reduce overall monitoring costs and facilitate early identification of subsidence hotspots. The state should also press water users to provide more robust assessments of the risks of future subsidence in their plans. I think you've heard me say probably 1,000 times by now that our strategy is always pick more sustainable water options. When we rely less on imported water and groundwater, when we use recycling and water conservation, a lot of other strategies, we can really make a big dent in reducing the groundwater problems, as well as our reliance on imported water. And lastly, we need to continue monitoring subsidence and see how severe the problem is getting. A subsidence monitoring network in the San Joaquin Valley, consisting of 31 meters, was implemented in the 60s, but its monitoring capacities Its monitoring capacities were vastly reduced by the 1980s, like I said before, when the Central Valley Project and State Water Project came into play, and scientists thought, oh, we've got this imported water on the surface now, people won't be pumping quite so much. Well, that wasn't true. So when they thought that was the case, they really shut down a lot of this monitoring and then realized later, uh-oh, we've got a problem now. So a new monitoring network is being developed using state-of-the-art equipment, and I could give you all the science words for the things they use, but it's a lot. And but the San Joaquin Valley Subsidence Monitoring Network, they're coming together and they're going to be monitoring this. But more or less, we don't have a permanent solution, no one-size-fits-all solution for subsidence right now. Really, it's just about monitoring and working on SGMA plans, groundwater sustainability plans. And then I will always say work on sustainable solutions that don't rely so heavily on groundwater or imported water. So at this point, I will see if folks have any questions. And if anyone wants the notes or anything, I'm happy to send it to you. And then if we have any subsidence experts on here who want to tell me I'm wrong, happy to hear what you have to say.
Hi, everybody. It's Sydney. Happy New Year.
Hi, Sydney. Happy New Year.
I feel like I've been kind of bad today. I should have seen that there was a meeting earlier and I kind of just now thought about it. Sorry.
That's okay. We all get tired on a Wednesday. It's, you know, New Year. I can send you the notes and slides.
I read your email and I had a question about, you said we had 33.9 trillion gallons of precipitation.
Yes, that's true.
How do you know how many gallons?
I walked around with a bucket. No, I'm just kidding. Some scientists, they record it. They know. So last year's water year, a water year is October to September of the following year. Last year's water year, we got 33.6 trillion gallons total. This year, so far, since October 1st, we've already gotten 33.9 trillion. So that's a good sign. Doesn't mean we can stop conserving and go take hour-long showers, but you know, it's something.
I hope a lot of that was collected. I know some of it was.
I wish more of it was. Yeah. Jan?
I haven't heard the word enforcement in your presentation. And so you've got all sorts of people, farmers and drilling, you know, there doesn't seem to be any limit on how much they can drill and take from their neighbor, and there doesn't seem to be any repercussions for them doing it. So even if we monitor, it's kind of like the air district, you know, even if you monitor the refineries, if you don't have enforcement, it's, and if it's nothing more than a slap on the wrist, we'll pay a fine. So what is the process for trying? I mean, like you said, they just, no matter how much water you give them, they want more. So how do you...
From my understanding, there's no real enforcement right now, but at the end of that 20 years, with so close to 20 years, yeah, at that point they will. But you know, we've already seen they basically get to write the rules and they're trying to grandfather in how much water they could take and keep for themselves. So will it be effective? And then are we even going to have water? I mean, we saw last month that there won't be any snow in the Sierra Nevada in 25 years. So by the time these things start coming into compliance and there's a real effect for them, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Karen?
Yeah, related to that, it seems like things like the big, powerful almond growers and stuff just go on expanding, which is completely nuts because we can't come close to managing what we have now. I mean, at some point, this house of cards is going to collapse. But I guess they're just so politically powerful and can buy enough politicians that we don't have legislation that would begin to look at this and start limiting expansion of water gobbling perennial crops, which are, different from less thirsty crops that are annual. So you can fallow a field in bad years and plant in better years. And it just seems like we continue in this crazy system of denial, and we'll go on expanding.
Yeah, there should be restrictions. I don't know if you permits or what you need, but they're exporting, more than half of what they're producing. So it's not like, we Californians need more nuts.
Yeah,
Of any kind.
yeah.
Well,
I
and
think
the other thing-
80% of it goes
Yeah,
to
it's really
Asia.
ridiculous.
The other thing too is they need to regulate what chemicals are used to
Right.
I don't know the word, I can't think of the word, but like
The pesticides?
well, that and something else, like the process that they use to make it warm, I guess, to kill any bacteria, and they do it with some kind of chemical.
Hmm.
I don't know about a
I don't know if it's brominating or
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
uh,
none of that's good.
gosh darn it! I really wish I could think of the name, the word. What word? am I
You might be thinking of, well, that's a whole other
Fumigating?
tangent. Yeah,
What?
fumigating.
Fumigating.
Yeah, and if we remember in October, we were getting at the idea of how much water are used by almonds, and even one of our allies on the board of Metropolitan said something to Wade Crowfoot, Secretary of Natural Resources Agency, saying, "Hey, almond farmers use more water than all of Los Angeles in a given year." And he said, hey, they provide jobs. And, I think we know at this point that's a PR thing created by certain farmers. There's a lot of other things that create jobs and jobs that pay better and have other rights. It's a very, everything is interwoven, right? Jobs, human rights, water,
Right.
it's all related. Nancy, I saw you had your hand raised. No, I'm good.
So, did we talk? I know I came on late, but did we talk about what's going on yet with the Delta Tunnel? Or
No, but I can give you an update. It'll hit, the vote will hit mid-2022. So we'll talk next week. Next Wednesday will be a strategy meeting. We'll talk about our plans for that then. And then there's metropolitan meetings next week. So I'll give you some updates. And there's some TUPC temporary urgent petition for change at the State Water Board right now going on. It's all interwoven and complicated, but I'll give folks an update on that next week when we know a little bit more. And
there's something going on January 20th, I think, with the MWD or something.
January 20th?
I'm not sure. I'd have. Let me see. I wrote something down. It says. I don't know if I wrote it down or not. Maybe I didn't write it down. I don't know. I thought I saw something. I think I saved it in my email.
I think we'll do something on the 25th, but I'll give you information closer to the 25th so that you don't have to get overwhelmed right now. We'll do something. Yeah.
So how much of the 39 point whatever trillion gallons of precipitation go into the reservoirs or places that we had that are really bad on drought?
That's a good question. I'll look into that for you. Jenny, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah, do you have, because you read the data out, but it wasn't on screen, about the energy usage of the pumps on the California Canal? that was really interesting that it's the biggest energy user in California. Maybe that's why PG&E likes MWR so much.
Yeah, I think I heard somewhere else that this can't be right. 80% of our energy use goes to water. I'll look into that for you. Yeah, I mean, but it's a lot. It's a lot of water to pump upwards. You know, gravity will take water down, but it's a lot to pump upwards. That was one of the things we were saying about Pacheco and Sites reservoirs, that the gravity used to send the water down into Sites reservoir is not going to be enough energy generated to pump it back out. So yeah, a lot of energy used in all of this, but I'll find that for you. And yeah, it was 15% of the California aqueducts monthly energy just goes to fighting subsidence, with all of the energy where it has to go back up from the little bumps and curvatures.
So
And
is
another
Sites
little
actually still gonna-
sidebar on this is that the price of nuts is down all over California because of the supply chain problems. They weren't able to ship over. Oh, I laid in a supply of almonds and walnuts and nuts at grocery outlet. The prices are I haven't been able to afford them for years. So I don't know, that does feed the growers, but on the other hand, it's also feeding me.
Yeah. I also like to always make a pitch for oat milk. If you haven't tried it, it's great. It uses a lot less water than almonds and cows. Tasty. So give oat milk a chance. Check it
Oh,
out.
oat milk is fabulous.
It's my favorite.
My dad likes flax milk.
Okay.
I don't know how much that uses, but
Oh, thanks,
There-
Mission.
there are some really good almond milks out there, but I guess almonds use a lot of water. So I don't know much about it, but I'm just going by what you guys say.
I've heard it's 55 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of oat milk, almond milk. Almond milk.
Hey.
Yeah.
Can't they maybe just use 48 gallons instead? I don't really understand those.
I don't know enough about how they do that. Rice milk, yeah, rice uses a lot of water. We're taking a neutral stance on rice patties right now because there's some, like the research I mentioned with Met, there's a possibility that it might help with some subsidence because of the rice patties, but not necessarily, because it does use a lot of water. But the rice milk that we get is not necessarily from, I don't think a lot of rice milk is produced in California. A lot of times it comes from other areas where it's not as much of an issue. But then you also have to think about stuff getting shipped further away. I'm not really sure where they grow oats. I think that's mostly a Midwest kind of thing. So there's always some kind of give and take about the damage we're doing, right?
I don't know if this is the truth, but like however many gallons of water they say it uses to make these things, or however many gallons of water they say it uses to produce 1 pound of beef, I'm pretty sure if they were to use 5 or 10 fewer gallons to make those things, that it would be just fine.
I'm not an ag scientist. I couldn't say, but maybe they can just find other solutions. Sometimes the market has to drive farmers to make these changes. Jen, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, this isn't so much about subsidence, but we had an article in the last couple of days in our, I'm East Bay, San Francisco, and they talked about the Kern River. Since the late 1800s, every drop has been pulled off, diverted, and water allocations must consider the public trust doctrine. And under the state Supreme Court precedent, the Water Board has both the power and the duty to adjust antiquated water rights to protect public trust interest. And so there's a possibility there. I mean, there's more info in the article that, a lot of this senior water rights has been abused. and it's possibility that, you know, we're always trying to keep the public right to water and air and everything. And maybe there's a way forward with this. I hope so.
You know what,
Yeah.
send me that article. I can talk to our attorney about it. Maybe see if they've got any ideas.
Yeah. So
That would be great.
Yeah.
Because it seems like we'll never get out of this if we, in any way, sustainable, if we don't address both limiting the water
Right.
hungry kinds of crops and then looking at the way that water is distributed. A lot of which just has to do with who got there first, which has no logical relation to where the greatest need is.
Mhm. Yeah, public need, right.
Yeah.
The
Got
public
there
right to
first.
water.
Yeah, who got there first, who's elected to or appointed to water boards and water agencies and all of that. Also, well, speaking of elections, I'm going to make another pitch for the electoral committee or Sierra Club if you want to volunteer with them, and then help us find great people to run for water boards because it is an election year. We can get rid of some of these bad guys. Or if you want to run yourself, let me know and I'll put you in touch. Folks like us, definitely the people
I
who
would
should
love
be
to,
running.
but I don't know that I'm capable. I don't know if I'm
You can
smart
always
enough.
help out volunteer. If you can't run for office, you can always help someone else who could. Something to think about.
So when exactly is the election this year?
What's what?
When is the election this year? I know.
Oh,
there's
November. I don't
this
know
is
the exact
a
date, but
special election, right? It's called?
there may be some special elections, but it's an election year. Some water boards are every 2 years, some are every 4. Some
what is-
members of
What
water
is this
agencies-
election called? Forget.
Midterm.
well, the
midterm.
yeah, the midterm. I mean, some water boards are every 2 years, some are every 4. Some are just a responsibility of city council members. Some are folks who are appointed. It depends on the water board and the agency. Any other questions about subsidence? I'm happy to send notes and slides to anyone who wants it. And then this recording will get on our website sometime soon.
So
Well,
sites.
thank you. It wasn't too technical.
Good.
No,
Good.
thank you.
Okay.
This
Thank you.
doing this kind of background stuff is helpful, as is
Mhm.
just a chance to discuss it, because there's so much. I have one last question. It's not related to this, but I got a notice from Restore the Delta about a meeting today about the Water Resources Control Board. It was at a time that I couldn't go, and it was sort of a last minute notice, but they were talking, I guess D1641 is a scientifically based water quality standard that they're wanting to waive and have waived
Mhm.
every time there's drought.
Yeah, that's the temporary urgency petition. So basically, when we have a drought or when there's a declaration of drought, that's when a lot of the environmental protections are waived because they'll say, oh, well, we need water. It's a drought. It's an emergency. And then a lot of the things we fight so hard for are, they take a break. And then I think this one in particular, we have someone who works on this full time. If you have questions for her, it's Erin Woolley, 2 L's EY, WOOLLEY, if you want to email her. But there was the temporary, the little pause in the laws was supposed to end in November. Now they're extending it, and they're probably going to keep extending it. And they do this every time there's a drought in most of the big ag districts. And the ag districts are the ones that take from the Delta and groundwater and everywhere else. So it's a problem.
It's huge in terms of. I mean, I really fear we're getting closer and closer to just ecosystem collapse in the Delta.
Yeah.
It's a possibility. I think that it's hard to say about a collapse. I don't think we're at collapse level yet, but it's, things are serious. salmon are in trouble.
They found the salmon in the Marin River or something, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's been
The
salmon in
do
the
really
creek.
well with water.
There've been salmon in the creeks in the Bay Area that haven't been seen in 50 years or more.
Wow.
San
Are they
Lorenzo
making a
Creek.
comeback?
They
Pardon?
just need water, regular water, just like
Are
the
they
Delta,
making a
regular water.
comeback?
So that's a good question. People are trying, they're being blocked by all the dams that are on these creeks.
Mhm.
So that's the biggest push right now. But
Yeah,
it is good news.
we lost 98% of, I think it's the winter run Chinook salmon in 2021.
Winter run Chinook.
Winter run
Yeah.
Chinook, yeah. So if they're coming back, it's hard to say. It's hard to say in what pockets and where they are and all of that. I did want to say, did Steve just hop off? Oh, okay. Steve requested that next month's topic is about solutions to all of these things. And I had an expert coming, but I didn't want to bother her over the holidays. So that'll be next month's topic. And then next week, we'll talk about strategies for fighting all these things. And then the week after that, I'll put folks to work and we're going to take some actions. So if you're able to join, same time next week, same link now by request. It will always be the same link, so you don't have to dig through and find it. But all right, any other questions?
Is
Nope,
it the
it was
Chinook
good,
salmon?
Katie. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Is it the Chinook salmon we're talking about?
I gotta go.
Yes.
Okay. Because my dad works for a seafood company, and sometimes he'll bring salmon home, and I'm hoping it's not in the endangered species.
No, I don't think they can sell endangered species.
I'm gonna talk to him about it because I wonder if anyone's doing anything, like anyone besides us is doing anything about. I mean, if we've lost that much of those.
Dan Bacher, one of our volunteers, he's a reporter on fish related issues. He writes about it in Daily Coast almost every week or every day even. And then Save California Salmon, they're one of our big allies. They do a lot. And of course the tribes in NorCal and the tribes work with Save California Salmon on salmon issues. Oh, and then Golden State Salmon Association and the Audubon Society. There's a lot of groups that care about salmon. So
is there anything like going on the law, like any laws or elected officials taking action?
Not specific to salmon that I know of, but there's a lot going on with water that would then protect the salmon. I mean, all the stuff that we talk about all the time, it's all related.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, folks, have a good night. This will be on the website soon. Take care. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
And the
Happy
sites
New Year.
project is still going, right?
For now. Till we
What?
beat it. Yep. For
What?
now. Yes, for now until we beat it. Yeah.
Okay. All
All
right.
right. Have a good night. Bye, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Bye.